the road. Thank you. So thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Buy versus Rebuild, where we're going to discuss options and decision points for replacing your dwelling. I'm going to start with a little bit about United Policyholders. We're a national nonprofit. We've been working in the disaster and insurance recovery space for 32 years. And we try to serve as a voice for consumers in all 50 states, providing information in this area. We are not for profit, not for sale, funded by donations and grants. We don't take money from insurance companies, so we can be that unbiased resource for you. One of the unique things about us is our Team Up, which is we've got a small staff in San Francisco and in other states, and then we partner very heavily with government and nonprofits, and then our professional volunteers, and then our fired up survivors, our Team Up members who are previous catastrophic loss survivors who want to share the information that they have with you. Which we have several folks joining you today. Let's go. We have 3 programs. Our Roadmap to Recovery, of which this is part, which is where we're talking about how to move forward, getting back home after catastrophic loss. Our Roadmap to Preparedness, which is where we take those lessons learned, what people need to know to be better protected in case of a disaster. And then our Advocacy and Action, where we take those pain points that people experience and work with regulators and legislators to improve consumers' rights and protections. If this is your first time joining us at a United Policyholders event, here's our disaster insurance help libraries. This is how to navigate the resources we provide. We have state-specific resources, professional help, samples and examples, our Survivors Speak series, and then of course our upcoming workshops and events. If you want to follow along on today's deck, here's the slide for that on our website. You just go to events and pull it up and you'll have it with you. And just one caution here to talk about effective communication. Just a reminder, with this topic as well as any other, and your insurance claim is a business negotiation, it's a legal contract. And so you want to document your conversations, document your losses, and and keep this very business-like, keeping everything in writing, having that paper trail to help you ensure that all those promises get kept. And then one note, especially with this topic, depending on what you're deciding to do, whether you're buying, rebuilding, or doing something else, being aware that the adjuster assigned to your case may not have the authority to give you what you need. Every insurer has a chain of command. And so if they're not able to help you, then ask to go up the food chain and speak to their manager. Last thing before we get into our topic, the fine print. So this workshop is general guidance only. We're not providing legal advice. And our speakers are volunteering their time as educators to help you today. Joining me today, I'm Valerie Brown, UP's Deputy Executive Director. I have Annie Barber, who's our Roadmap to Recovery Coordinator and also a 2017 Tubbs Fire Survivor. Scott Winfield from Colorado. He lives in Denver now, but he was, we met him with the 2013 Black Forest Fire in Colorado Springs. And then Becky Nelson, who's currently from Chico, but was impacted. I lost her home in the 2018 Camp Fire. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. And then the goal of today's workshop is just basically to help you explore options for replacing your dwelling. And then this graphic here is where, what the options are as we see. If your home was destroyed, you can rebuild the house it was. You can rebuild a different house with those insurance proceeds. You can buy elsewhere, or you can rebuild elsewhere. And those are the options basically if you're going to replace that home. And let's just get on with this. So we're going to talk at a high level about the decision process. Our survivors who bought a replacement home will share some of their thinking in this area. Annie, who rebuilt, will share how she made that decision. We're going to talk about challenges that are applicable to both, especially if you're buying a replacement home. There's a little more nuance there, and end with some helpful resources. So for our panelists today, Scott, Becky, Annie, please don't hesitate to just jump in whenever you need to say something. This is very much a panel, and we just appreciate you providing your expertise today. All right, and so decision process, we're going to hit these topics, what the options are, talk about affordability, where those additional funds come from, the decisions you're facing now, and some common questions we see. So we're going to jump right into affordability. Depending on what you're looking at, if you are underinsured, you might be looking at, can you downsize, right? If you don't have a mortgage, can you rebuild smaller? Are you interested in moving elsewhere? That house might have been the one thing tying you. And Scott, I'm thinking your family, you had the home, but you're looking at, well, we were planning to do this in a few years. We're going to take that opportunity and do it. And then another thing that especially we're seeing with the Marshall Fire, the building code upgrade requirements, pricing you out of the rebuild. When we're talking about underinsurance, just at a high level, these are where people find those additional funds, external savings, be it, funds you have, funds your family, personal property proceeds. A lot of people take their contents money and pour it into the rebuild. Retirement savings, SBA loans, and those options. And some people, especially with the 2020 and 2021 fires, the ability to get a builder incredibly impacted even being able to move forward. So several people are looking at doing an ADU or a granny unit, right? And so they're rebuilding now while they figure out how much money they have and can they get a builder they can afford so that they have a place to live while they're going through that process, and then taking that and turning it into a rental once they've moved forward. And if I can just tap the three panelists, when you were looking at your decision, if you were underinsured, did you have to tap any other funds? And if so, which of these buckets did you grab from? Oh, sorry, Becky, you're muted.
Becky, you need to unmute.
There you go.
Okay, you got me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Our situation was we ended up purchasing a house that was going to be built in a subdivision. When our fire came through, it took the whole town. 28,000 people got displaced in one day, and 14,000 homes. So it was unique. And so what we did was we got a replacement home, and it was in a subdivision, but we had to wait a year to get into that house. And we're still in it, by the way. But there was no way we could afford the house that we purchased because of the inflated prices in the area. Everything just shot up crazy. And so we absolutely had to use our personal property funds to get into the house. We used those funds along with the replacement money that we got with our insurance to purchase the house. It left us a little bit left over to put a few pieces of furniture in the house, but those funds were, and the good news, I was worried because the insurance company said, you're free to spend those however you want to. And so that was one concern that I had, but they said, nope, it's your money. You can do whatever you want, but they were not going to pay out more than their policy limits. So.
Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
And for me, I'll chime in here. So I rebuilt, and part of my savings was I used a production builder, which kept the price down. When they can do economy of scale, it becomes more affordable. And mine was a turnkey house. So that's how I was able to stay within the parameters of my insurance.
Yeah, in my case, we were moved from Colorado Springs to Denver, and we did have a short-term loan for a period of time. Uh, it was a home equity line of credit that we used to, satisfy the mortgage amount. So that's how we did that.
And that's a very common scenario. Thank you all for sharing that. All right, so, and this gets into decisions you're making now, right? How this is going to impact the rest of your financial future. And so you want to be careful when you're making these decisions to set yourself up for success as much as possible in a very impossible situation. So you're looking at, do you have child college expenses? Are you retired or looking at retirement? Are you worried about medical long-term care? You know, that's the kind of stuff that should be helping drive the decision you're going, right? And these are some of the common questions we see. You know, we're properly insured. If you're underinsured, how much is owed against your house? If you have a mortgage, you know, that gets into it. Can you buy elsewhere in this market? How far would you need to move? If you're working, is that going to impact your current lifestyle? Can you refinance? Especially going back to this last issue, medical and long-term care. You know, it turns into, you know, should you consider accepting the insurance and becoming a renter or independent living? You know, there's a lot of decisions that could be made. And, you know, it's worth looking at the big picture to figure out how do you decide what you're going to do? Because remember, not all these decisions you're making are going to be financial. That insurance is part of it. You're getting a quote, working with a realtor if you're thinking about buying. Typically, you're doing those in tandem anyway. Even if as you're working with insurance to maximize your coverage, you want to make sure that you know, you're to be paid out to limits. You might be doing in tandem, looking at rebuilding and also looking at buying. And then looking at the tax ramifications. And so one of the tips that we have to help make this decision is, this is one of our Team Up volunteers who in our Survivor Speak series, when they lost their home after the Tubbs fire, they found they were underinsured. And so they, he found a tool called the Forced Choice Matrix, and used it to help figure out what they wanted to do and, where they wanted to live and what did they want in a home. And so this is on the left, obviously, is their notebook version. And then they created a handy version of it for us to figure out what their priorities were, ranking those priorities, and then figuring out which are the absolute have-to-haves and which could be pushed to the side, right? And so knowing what was a more business-like, more rational decision to help them think clearly. Okay. And then getting, should you rebuild, right? And where are you in life? What about your kids? Do you have family living with you? Who do you support? And think about, are you rebuilding to stay in the area permanently, or would you leave the area in retirement? Like Scott said, making that decision to move because of, where you are with your family. I have some friends who, when their neighbors didn't rebuild, that's what they loved about the neighborhood was their neighborhood group. And when the neighbors decided not to rebuild, they decided not to go back. Because that was the appeal there. And so, knowing all of these decision factors, how to weigh that in. Again, restating a different way of looking at this. So, options to rebuild as was, different home, buy elsewhere, rebuild elsewhere, right? And so whichever one you're doing, the process is almost identical. The most important thing, of course, is to know how much it would cost to rebuild the house you lost up to those policy limits. And you know, in getting that agreement with your insurance company on what they owe you is key, because then you know what your budget is, whatever you're going to decide to do. And if you're buying, just to be aware, sometimes your adjuster will say you need an estimate and a code bid for the house you're buying. You're insured for the house you lost. So the code bid is for the house that you were in. It doesn't mean that they're not going to potentially offer you to upgrade if you bought an existing home, right? But what they owe you is all of those coverages that go in there. And just when we talk about getting an estimate from your insurer, if they paid you out the policy limits and you've maxed out your coverage, you're not going to need an estimate. You know what you've got. If there's some disagreement about how much it would cost to replace the house, that's where you're looking at that.
And if you live in a subdivision and people are rebuilding the house, you know, they're going with a builder who's already done the code upgrades, you can utilize that if you have the same square footage, if it's built in the same year.
And just to touch on that, one more thing, you know, aim for that agreed upon scope of loss. And these are the tips to be aware of. And we just did this webinar last month. So it's recorded and available to you if you need to refresh on that issue. So, but what does all this mean, right? The biggest thing to focus on is the amount they owe you is based on the cost to rebuild the home you lost, right? Plus code upgrades, you know, up to your policy limit. If you had an extended replacement cost coverage, that gets in there. If your dwelling A is insufficient to rebuild, that, you know, and you've exceeded that, if you have extended replacement coverage, that would also bump up, right? And this is the reality for most people, is your estimate's going to be higher than your insurance company's estimate. You can focus on correcting, but the big thing is just know and enforce your rights. And then this is the, you know, just it's in here just to say what most people get is after the loss, you're going to get this actual cash value, right? So those are the funds that your insurance company, they're undisputed. They're saying your house was worth this. We've depreciated it for wear and tear and age, and we're going to pay you this. To get this difference, that replacement cost, you have to incur that expense. You're either incurring it by rebuilding or buying. And so for replacement costs, this is just the state bulletins and regulations that are related to this. I'm not going to read through them. This deck obviously is available on site, but for Colorado, there's a bulletin issued February 8th, 2022. California code, it's here. And then that last thing that we talked about in this section was be aware of the tax ramifications. I'm not very good at this. Sorry, I'm going to take a, because if you're buying, your documentation might look different than you're rebuilding. And if you're deciding, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to do something different. I had a friend who decided they were going to sail the world. You know, it was cheaper to buy and, buy a sailboat than replace their home. And they'd always wanted to do that. And so that's what they did. But there were some tax ramifications, obviously, because it didn't cost as much as they had in insurance. All right, we'll take a deep breath here. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to be audible on that. I've got to mute myself. And so, Scott and Becky, this is an opportunity for you two to just share how you got to that decision. I'm going to just show from the Woolsey fire. This is a gentleman who had bought a replacement home. Ended up being about $750,000 underinsured. So could not afford to rebuild on his beautiful property. He bought a replacement home. And this one is from one of our Marshall fire folks who just wanted to secure, just basically cut the chaos on the family and buy the home so that they were home, kids were in school, and everything was moving forward. All right, so you've decided to buy a home instead of rebuild. So where did you start? Scott, where did you start?
Well, we were planning on moving from Colorado Springs to Denver simply because our kids and grandkids were up in Denver area. So it the we just decided that there was nothing to keep us in Colorado Springs. I had lost my job. My wife had one more year on her contract for her job. So there was nothing really keeping us in Colorado Springs, and we were tired of driving the 60 miles from Colorado Springs to Denver. So that was, we were planning on doing it anyway, so it just moved our timetable up by about a year. We were both going to retire in 2014. So that's kind of our decision. It was pretty easy in our case.
All right, Becky?
Me unmute, there we go. Well, as I mentioned before, the circumstance to buy or rebuild, if we chose to rebuild, which we did consider, we loved our home. We were there 42 years and we had remodeled it many times and, just really worked it. And, we couldn't get a builder. There were so many homes that were destroyed. Just think, 14,000 homes in one day. And many of the builders that we knew lost their homes. So all of our network that we tap into, if you just have your house, you're living on a street, your house burns down, you tap into all your friends in your community. But our entire community was destroyed that day. So we bought, we just had to get somewhere. And the matrix that you showed was really cool. I'll tell you what was at the top of ours was family. My son is here and we've been here 46 years total. And we just were not going to move. It just wasn't going to happen. That would have just been insult to injury. And so we kept that as our main focus. We want to stay in the area. And then the opportunity to purchase a home in a subdivision came about and we grabbed it. Here's something that I want to mention too, though. In the process of buying a home, replacing it, what we didn't realize until we were kind of in it is that there was the ticket price for the home, but the insurance company was going to deduct the price of the land that the new house was sitting on. So let's say if a house is $500,000, but the land is 100,000, the insurance would only give us 400,000 so we would have to come up with the land cost. So that is why we had to tap into our personal property money, because everything just inflated so fast. It just sort of happened really quickly. So that's just something for people to be aware of, that when you replace it, they're going to deduct the price of the land. Now, maybe the laws have changed in California. I think a lot of people felt outraged by that at the time. It just seemed unfair. Well, everything seemed unfair, but that might have changed. You ladies probably know whether or not that law has changed or not.
Yeah, but it's for after a certain year. So for 17, 18, 19, 20, and I believe the 21s, it was not solidified until 22, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Annie. And then in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, for anyone from those states, you can make the case, and we will run through that a little bit about, the insurance was intended for the house, so it shouldn't be an item to be subtracted, but we'll talk about that in a little more detail later. But depending on your year of your fire, at least in California, it is an issue. If you're in another state, you're having to make that argument.
Right.
And then let me jump on these. So, so now in, you have the ability to buy a replacement home, because in some states it's not necessarily accepted. depending on your policy language, but, again, it's, the measure of what you're owed is going to include all those costs that would have been incurred, just like you had replaced it, right? If those costs exceed your stated dwelling limit, and qualified you for that extended replacement coverage, those dollars should be also allocated. And I know I've said this before, but repeating it because it's important to hear. And so this is the process that from what we understand, you're going to present your insurer with one or more estimates for what it would cost to rebuild, reach that agreement, unless you, of course, reach policy limits with them. And then after you reach the agreement, you're going to find a home that costs at least as much as it would have cost to rebuild, right? Present the real estate documentation to your insurer and just move forward. So Scott, how did yours play out with that piece?
Well, we did get a quote, for a replacement house, but we weren't real interested in following up on that. We still owned the lot in Black Forest, which we eventually sold, down the road. But they were pretty good about getting us the amount of money we needed to at least get into a house with the home equity line of credit, and then once we sold the lot, we were able to more or less pay off that the home equity line of credit. So that seemed to work okay for us. Regarding the lot situation, I know we had some dickering back and forth because the lot here in Denver was more expensive than the one in Colorado Springs, but they seem to have worked that out, so we didn't have any kind of a penalty like like Becky ran into.
Yeah, and a lot of it's going to depend on your insurer and how they move this forward, right?
Yeah.
So I want to share a little bit of survivor wisdom. Lee Lehrman is the North Bay fires in 2017, lost his home. And so they sold their lot, they bought a replacement home. His caution is just, take your time, find the right home, and he said they didn't choose well. And so they're looking at, they have a house that doesn't suit them. And so they're probably going to either, buy elsewhere later. Right. And so just, take the time to make a good decision, especially if you have your additional living expense. Take the time to go through the decision-making process and figure out what it is that you really need. All right. Annie, I'm going to pop over to you for rebuilding. And so two things to start. This is your lot and process. And then, when you finish, then I'm going to mute myself and let you walk us through making that decision and where you are now.
So for me, this was kind of a knee-jerk reaction. I had worked really hard to keep my house through the years. I'd had a sick husband, so finances were tight. And I was really proud of myself that I had held on to my house, and I did not want to sell it. I didn't want to move in the sense of, not having it be mine anymore per se. And so for me, it was more my stubbornness, I think, that I wanted to be able to have my house back. That was part of my security. It felt right. I'd been in this neighborhood for 32 years and raised my son in my house. The kind of ironic part about the whole thing was that I had planned on moving in with my boyfriend in December, and I had done a lot of upgrades on my house so that my son and his future wife, present wife now, could move into it and pay a small rent so that they could buy a house at some point. It's the only way that I could help him. So as much as I really, really had to rebuild this house, that was my focus. I have not lived in it. I go over there for all the holidays. I cook, I clean, I watch the cats. And there's just something about being back in my neighborhood that feels right. I also should say that I used a production builder, which made this process fairly quick by most people's standards. We had formed a group, and one of my things to do was to vet the big builders, the production builders. And I don't mean by like we were referring, we were just doing a matrix of what they offered. And so the builder that stood out to me was the one who had the logical answers and could answer. And so because I had interviewed for our group early on, that's where he put me in the rebuild process. So my house, because he was a production builder, because he understood how to do this, they did 20 foundations the first month. Those 20 foundations were framed the second month. This was a 6-month rebuild from start to finish. And I also got economy of scale, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, so from debris cleanup to it, you were back in within, not that you were in, but you were back in here. And Annie, you have a comment in the Q&A. Just a reminder to everyone participating in today's webinar, the question and answer is open below, and you can ask a question at any point, and we'll weave it in.
Yeah. So I used a gentleman who came out of retirement. He does assisted living places now. I used Bill Gallagher, and he just came out to help the community come back. So unfortunately, he's not building homes anymore.
Well, and I think you were fortunate to live in an area where there were a lot of builders. And so the reality for the Western fires the last couple of years is that there aren't a lot of builders. COVID really did a number on labor. And so, a lot of people are just going with who they can find, if they can find someone. So, but for Annie, that worked, and she managed to get all of those pieces. So we're going to jump into challenges now. One of the first ones we see, obviously, is that difference between the insurance company's estimate and what you're either buying or what you're rebuilding. Making sure that you're getting like kind of quality, you're capturing that code upgrade coverage, whether you're buying or rebuilding, and dealing with that land valuation that Becky mentioned earlier. So soft costs, whether you're buying or rebuilding, this is one of those things that you'll often find is missing from an estimate that you get from your insurance company. And if you're buying a replacement home, you really want to make sure those items are on there, because a lot of times the insurers will say you're only getting paid this if it's incurred. And your argument is, I'm buying a replacement home. It is just like I built my home back. Like, kind, and quality, again, going back to what they owe you. There's nothing in the statute or the policy that say you actually have to replace with like, kind, and quality. So, being very clear and, going back to that answer, we always recommend, ask them, tell me where it says this in my policy. Because if it's not in your policy, it's up for negotiation, right? California, here's the measure indemnity. It's what they owe you. It's going to be replacement costs, building code upgrade, and extended replacement coverage. That's the statute to be aware of. This is the bulletin, and this is where it exists on our site. So you don't have to go looking for it. Colorado actually has this. And so unfortunately, we were working with your legislators when the Marshall Fire happened to get this into your regulations there. It doesn't apply to Marshall losses, but what it does is establishes the standard that Colorado lawmakers expect insurers to provide. And so you can make this argument that this was the intent, this is now the law, and you should honor it. And the insurance commissioner has made that point repeatedly. And some insurers are doing it. Obviously, we had Tim's house that he had purchased after the Marshall fire. So, some insurers are doing this, but again, focusing on what do you need to do. Focusing on that code upgrades, you read your policy. Again, this is about the house that you lost, bringing it up to current building codes, up to your available policy limits. So this is where you're looking at sprinklers, solar, the energy efficiency, where you're going from a 2x4 to a 2x6, the type of windows, all of those things, and amount of insulation in the home. All of this cost is determined by the original house. Even though you're going to roll, once you agree to that number, it could be rolled into the purchase and upgrading of a purchase of a new home, or purchase and upgrading of an existing home. And we've done a webinar on this one as well. We'll make sure we share that. Getting those ordinance and law payouts by buying elsewhere. Here's 2 publications to help you with that. Now we're going to jump on the land value issue. As Becky said, some insurers want to deduct the amount for the land under you. We believe it's unfair. It is still in most states an unsettled area of law. And to be really frank, in California, it went to the legislature 3 times. The legislature made it the law of the state, and then there was apparently wiggle room. So it seems right now that it's solid. But you're asking, you're insured for the cost of that lost home. You're not asking for money for the land. You're buying an existing house on land, which means it's not a windfall. You're actually getting less, most likely, right? And California actually has now passed it where, as I said to Becky earlier, it is now, there is no land value deduction for California folks. And this is, Becky had mentioned this, and this is the example of what this looks like, right? So when you purchase your home, you purchase the structure as well as the land it's on. Your purchase price is, or the resale value of that home is not what your insurance is for. It's for the cost to repair, rebuild that home, right? It's, your insurance is not related to your tax value or your resale value of that property. So when you purchase it, that's what you have, right? Insurance is only covering the structure.
Val,
Yes,
slow down a little bit for the interpreter, please.
I am so sorry. Let's go back here. So again, when you purchase the home, you're purchasing the structure as well as the land. The homeowner's insurance only covers the structure, not the land, right? And so if the home that was lost was $400,000, the value of the land is unknown after the loss. So your replacement cost would be $400,000 for that total loss, right? And then the land value here, we don't know what that is because you're still sitting on that lot. So if you decide to buy elsewhere, likely you're purchasing a home, like Becky said, she's taking the amount of insurance they owe her and saying, okay, you're going to, hey, I have that to buy a house. And then that value of the house that you're buying includes the value of the house and the land underneath it, right? So, which means you have a house that's worth less than that $400,000 you received from the policy. Again, no windfall. Your insurance is to replace that home. So the result is that purchased home is worth less than your previous home, right? And so, the argument should be that the land value of the house that I had makes no difference in the situation, right? And so hopefully this example makes it clear with the dollars attached. All right, and then we've got another survivor wisdom share here from Ken Klein. And this echoes what we say repeatedly. While this is a deeply emotional loss, for your insurance company, it's a legal contract and a business transaction. And so for you, unfortunately, navigating this, you have to keep your emotions out of the business decision and negotiation you're doing, right? So making sure that you resist making emotional decisions. And Ken's advice is do not let businesses profit off of your emotions. And Annie, while you let your emotions drive your decision, you also stuck within your budget to make it work.
I did, and I don't know what I would have done had I would have. Some people I know have to do a custom home because of the land that they have, where they're putting it, and if they don't have a production builder. That would have taken me out of the parameters of my insurance. So I may have had to have made a different decision at that point. But with all the factors that I had and the knowledge I had, it made it an easy decision, or maybe a no-brainer, literally.
Got it. And Becky, how would you characterize how you navigated this part of your insurance claim with the purchase of the home?
Well, interestingly enough, we lived in our home for a long time. And this house that we purchased was being built. And I had some leeway on finishes and different things. So in order to get the extended replacement costs, you have to incur the cost. So I went to town on this house. I had crown molding in my older house. I have crown molding in this house. I had wood floors in my house. I have wood floors in this new house. So all the upgrades that I had in my home that I lost, I put into this one. I mean, to make those decisions at that time was like, oh my gosh, I'm spending all this money, but it wasn't my money. It was my money, but I had to spend it in order to get it from the insurance. So funny story, my husband kept looking at me like, what? You know, we're getting what? And this, and, you know, backsplashes and countertops and cabinetry. This house is beautiful. It's not my former house, but I put my business hat and I said, I'm getting everything I lost. I can't have my house, but I'm going to get everything that I had in my house, the nice features that I had. It was important to me to get them here because they would not release the extended money unless I spent it. So I went shopping, so to speak.
Got it. Thank you. And yeah, it's interesting how you move that forward. Scott, anything you want to share on this topic?
Well, sort of related to that, was that when you're settling up with, the uh, cost of your house, I mean, up to the limit, of course. Um, and I brought this up in a previous call, is if you have pictures on the finishes on the inside of your house, from friends and families, you know, use that as a way to get more money out of the your insurance company for a replacement cost. Um, Also, any upgrades, we had upgraded our kitchen countertops, put in a new dishwasher, and that was, it was 6 months old when the house burned down. So that was also factored in. For instance, we had 6 panel hardwood doors on the inside of the whole house. And so, before, the adjuster just assumed that they were, kind of hollow doors and not solid wood doors. So we got a little extra kick because of the finish on the inside, of the with the doors. So.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We're gonna talk over just our last little thing about helpful resources. And then we'll see if we've got any more questions. So note for more recent California folks, You are now allowed to combine coverages. So this is the statute for that, just to be aware of that. If you haven't gotten our little yellow book, please email and we will get a copy to you. It's a great resource. Going back to what Becky and Annie said about using your contents money, your personal property money. The back half of this book is got the inventory listing to help you fill that out. And as we've seen with the forced decision matrix, we've got lots of publications on our Survivor Speak tip series. If you have a tip that you'd like to share, we would love to hear from you. So please send your tip to info@uphelp.org. Annie hosts our Survivor Series Forum. It's the third Tuesday of the month, and it's just a great source. Annie, anything you want to say about that?
Yeah. So in the real world, people who haven't been through a disaster cannot relate to people for the long term of recovery from a disaster. So what we found is that the people who understand us the most are those who've been through it. And that's what we focus on in our Survivor to Survivor series, sharing tips, things that worked, talking about our emotions, triggers, anything that you'd like to share, you're comfortable sharing. And so I invite all of you to join in. I see on the list that there are a few of you that do show up to this and that are on this meeting. And so that's our invite.
Well, thank you for that. Reminder, if you're needing assistance in Colorado, you can reach Dora here. California Department of Insurance is there. Upcoming events, and we are not doing a pricing party this Saturday. This is a slide I need to update. Sorry about that, but you go to events on our website and you can see upcoming events. And one of our, I find most impactful resources is our Ask an Expert forum. Because of the nature of our program, small staff, wide reach, multiple disasters that we're supporting, it's hard sometimes to get your individual question answered. And this is a way we put together to allow you to do that. So please register. It's free, add your question, and then you'll get information. They'll let you know when you have your answer, and hopefully it helps you navigate that. And I want to quickly, I'm going to thank our funders, our CRC, Golden State Finance Authority, Boulder Community Foundation, Santa Cruz, and Ventura Community Foundations. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I know we have a question in the Q&A. And if you will pull that up for us.
Actually, this is Luke, and we are dealing with him by setting him up with Jacques, who is our expert. This is the debris removal issue. So Luke, just know that we have someone who we're going to refer to you, and he's going to connect with you and hopefully help you with this issue. Got it. Thank you so much. Okay.
All right, thank you. So anyone else with any questions? We're this was very much about focusing on the decision making and just the wisdom that you need to know in navigating this. So any questions for any of our panelists? I'm going to mute myself. That means because I have feedback with Becky. So Becky, you can unmute yourself. Scott, Annie, Becky, anything you want to share with the group?
I'd like to share with you that in my studies of finding out the answers to all those questions that we all have, that I was able to connect with somebody who ran 210 structural warranty out of Colorado. And every time I had a question, the answer was I was referred to a engineer who answered my question. And then he would say to me, and I had like 5 questions at different times, the bigger the builder you use, the less problems you're going to have. So when you're picking a builder, look for those that have have built some homes that they've already messed up. They figured out how not to do it in the future. So that would be my best advice that I could give. Oh, and Roberta, the matrix that I did was in 2017, and it was for the Tubbs fire, the Coffee Park area of the Tubbs fire. So that matrix was simply the builders who were in our area at that time who were doing production builds.
I'd like to share people who are going through this recently to take your time. I think that when the insurance company gave us 2 years to really do something, and then it was extended because we were in a federal disaster zone. So really we had 3 under conditions. We really, even though we bought our house right away, we had so many questions in that year that it took to build, and we used this site a lot. I was telling the ladies earlier that once a week I logged on and I saw a video, asked a question. I couldn't believe the wealth of knowledge that was out there for free. And I used it because when you have a policy that you're buying, a fire insurance policy, I didn't read it. I did not read the policy, guilty. But I sure did after the fire. And there's nothing wrong with that, except you have to interpret it because it's written for insurance people with insurance ease in it. So I needed help interpreting the language and all the other things. So use this resource. I can't thank these guys enough. They really, really were a safety net for my husband and myself. And take your time. Take the time they're going to allow you. If you need it, take it.
And I will add one thing to this. As you go through the process, I'm 5 years out now, and I can tell you that I already know that if my house was to burn down again, after a certain age, I wouldn't rebuild. I would make a completely different choice just because of, how long, for me personally, how long it takes to rebuild, the things that can go wrong. There's a multitude of things that can go right, but do I want to spend my final years rebuilding a house? And so your decision today may not be your decision tomorrow, until you really look at all your options.
Scott, any last words of wisdom you'd want to share?
We were kind of pushed into starting to submit, our personal property right after, the house had burned down, and we decided, no, we're not going to deal with that. So I think it took like 6 months. We took 6 months off or so, and so don't rush into it, even though the insurance company is going to try and get you, started on it. And regarding personal property replacement, if in my case we had replacement, costs, and if you don't replace it, you probably won't get much money for anything you don't replace. They depreciate the heck out of just about anything and everything. So you have to. I still have boxes of stuff that I purchased, but they're in boxes simply because I could replace them and get State Farm, in my case, to pay for it. So,
Well, and that's a good point, especially if you're looking at needing to take your personal property coverage to help apply to whatever you're doing, whether you're buying or rebuilding. Having a list that inventory list that's going to far exceed your limits so that when they depreciate it, you're still going to max that out. It takes a lot of work. So,
Yeah.
you know, be aware if that's part of your decision making, you know, you need to factor that in. And we do have multiple workshops and resources to help you with the personal property inventory. So please take advantage of those because it's a lot to do, and it's one of the most stressful things I've seen people struggle with. So thank you all for your time today. Just want to wish you all a good evening, and thank you for joining us so much.
Thank you, Scott and Becky.
You're welcome. Glad to help.
We appreciate it. Thank you.